have your attention, please? This tape is on Pablo Picasso. Picasso. Put in the first slide, please. Pablo Picasso is probably the greatest living artist in the world today. He was born in 1881, and even in his mid-80s, he is still one of the creative geniuses leading the influences of the art world. He has gone through many styles, many periods. He has introduced many innovations in the world of art and has influenced many people. He has lived long enough to gain the recognition of his early works that are now selling in auctions for close to $200,000. And also, for Picasso, his works are neatly divided into segments that when one idea would come to a finish, a new idea starting, it's within definite periods and styles, so he's fairly easy to follow, and his work placed in these different categories. He was born in Spain, as I said, in 1881, arrived in Paris at 19, stayed there a few short months, returned to Spain, and then in his 20th year returned to Paris and lived there the early part of his life. So in his early 20s, he was being influenced by the change from the Impressionist period that was still sort of hanging on into the more modern movement of the 20th century. His first works are slightly young and immature in quality or in thought. They are called his blue period, but they have a force to them, even though they may not have a finish or a mature statement. He bordered on the melancholy, the sad, the grotesque, sort of using the sadness of the people with the dark blue color. That's why it's called the blue period, with sort of a heavy outline carried over from the Impressionists. Some of the more finished work has the sort of patchy strokes of the Impressionist painters. But all of them deal with the sad, poor people, exaggerating this idea of melancholy. Slide, please. He's done a tremendous amount of work during his lifetime, turning out things in rapid succession. Some of them good, some of them not so good, but all of them following within these categories and having some sort of a force that does influence the younger painters. The guitarist, with his head bent at the rakish angle, almost looks like it might be a horizontal painting rather than a vertical. And yet it works within the frame, sort of contorting the body, slightly reminiscent of maybe an El Greco figure, but contorting the figure to fit within the rectangular composition. Again, the blue, somber, ghostly tone. Slide, please. The same sort of angularity of the woman ironing, sort of this, the weighted quality, bending over, pressing on the iron, the outline defining the drawing. We will see draftsmanship to an excellent degree in most of Picasso's work. In some of the abstracts, it's not used to such a greater degree of sort of a sensitive beauty, but especially in the early ones, sensitive, beautiful lines sort of carving out the figure from thin washes of paint. Slide, please. The mother and child in a charcoal sketch. There is some distortion to the drawing, even at this point, but it's an exaggeration emphasizing certain aspects of the position or of the figure. Slide, please. He did several also etchings at this period of couples. They always look sort of hungry and sad, either at a table or just in repose, sitting. Most of these were maybe made from sketches from life, but certainly the exaggerations that he took with these paintings, they're more from the imagination than from life. Slide, please. An early self-portrait. Strong in character, optimistic, bold, still with the linear quality, the strong drawing quality. Now, this is still very early, the first few years of the 20th century, in his very early 20s. Slide, please. This is a portrait of Gertrude Stein. She, the American avant-garde writer that lived in Paris at this time, befriended the young struggling artist. She would buy Cézannes at $200 that now sell for $1 million. She had an eye for the modern, what was to be new, even in her writing, if you've ever read some of the poetry, and especially the sort of surrealistic quality of her placement of words together. Slide, please. Then around 1903 to 1905, he started in a little warmer period of time. And there's a transition between the blue period into what is called the rose period. And also at this time, he discovered a subject matter, the carnival people, or saltimbanques as they were called. And he uses this theme consistently over and over again in his paintings. With Picasso, he would develop a style or an idea up to a certain point, then usually leave it abruptly as a new idea came forward and develop that, and then later on in his career, he might go back and pick up the thread and then redevelop it, bringing it to a new climax. See? This has always been one of my favorites, but heavily influenced by Cézanne. The little girl eating from the bowl at the table. The heavier outline is not so reminiscent of Cézanne as it is Van Gogh, but the patchy little brushwork in this, especially at the diagonal angle, is more reminiscent of Cézanne. And you must remember that Cézanne was a great influence in the structure of modern art and the philosophy of it. Slide, please. This is Picasso's Blue Boy. It was one of the circus figures in sort of a blue tunic. It is a very sensitive painting, fairly large, about the size that you see it on the screen now. It is done more in turpentine washes, or very thin washes of paint, built up in layers or glazes, one on top of another. The face was modeled in sort of a burnt umber or a brown shade, and the light and the dark with areas of the eyes, the nose, the shadows, created with this transparent wash of tone, and then just a little area of opaque paint in the skin tone laid in where the highlight should be, leaving, especially around the eye area, the turpentine wash. And then the whole drawing was completed or pulled together with this outline, sort of a scumbly outline drawing with a brush. But it has a soft quality to it, a sensitive quality. Slide, please. This one also is in the same technique, and again dealing with the circus figures. It is owned by the Hermitage Museum in Russia. The highlights do not cover, or the opaque paint does not cover the entire surface, but the washes of tone are allowed to show through. Slide, please. And more of the figures. There's always sort of a sadness, a delicacy, yet a sadness to his circus people, and I think the feeling of the circus people carries through today. The sad clown look. Slide, please. All of these were figures within the circus area. Sometimes it would be left incomplete, like the background, that the figures are just sort of sketches within the center of the canvas. Slide, please. And then one of his early major works, The Family of Saltimbanques, or the Traveling Circus People, a fairly large composition, where the placement of figures is more in a development stage of composition than just almost like a portrait figure as we have seen before. Slide, please. The single figure could be a circus person, but just a model posing, holding a fan. This is one painting that I never appreciated until I saw the original, and through his use of glazing techniques of these transparent tones on top of each other, there is an iridescence to the top that the girl is wearing that shines almost like the iridescence of an abalone shell. Again, the technique is of the early rose and pink period, where the washes are underneath and the slightly highlights in opaque tones laid across the top. But you definitely see the texture of the canvas showing through, and you can almost see the different thin, washy layers that he applied, the background being very thin, almost in one coat. Slide, please. With the rose period that lasted from about 1905 to 1907, the colors got a little lighter, a little bit richer, a little warmer. The figures are the same. This is most likely the same young man that posed for the Blue Boy painting, with the addition of the sort of floral background and the wreath, and he's holding a pipe. Again, the size of the canvas is approximately life size. Slide, please. Then, along with Braque and Juan Gris, another Spanish painter, from 1908, they began a study of what is now called Cubism. And this was an intellectual breaking up of the surface of the human figure, or of the objects that they were painting. They were trying to do several things. Break it up with an interesting shapes or areas, rather than just representing the figure itself. But they were also trying to show the time of the figure itself, or the model itself moving, or the time as it would take you to walk around the figure. They sort of slice up the human figure and then reshuffle the slices and then present it as you would see it, trying to get the effect of motion and of movement and of time. So these sort of disassociated pieces come up in geometric shapes that look like they've been faceted, or if you're looking through the object through a prism. They're broken up in different flat planes. Slide, please. Sometimes they become very geometric and very abstract. The color at this time was sublimated in favor of the idea. Most of the Cubist period works were of the dirty grays, dirty blues, sort of dark, somber colors. Slide, please. Sometimes it is fairly easy to see the object or the figure. In this, the model, the figure has been sort of chopped up the surface, catching the flat planes, much like Cézanne would have done an apple or a piece of fruit. In this way, everything is changed into a geometric shape or form. And this is where you get the term Cubism. Slide, please. At first, the patterns look very abstract. Sometimes then you find out what the subject is. Of course, in this one being houses on a hillside. But it was almost mathematical in its layout of composition, of where one line would lead the eye to another area of the composition. Sort of a transparent overlay of shapes against one another. Slide, please. And they even went so far as to do portraits of friends within this technique of Cubism. The line is still important. Very little shading, sometimes shading up to the edge of a line, fading away at the opposite side. Slide, please. They were always fond of symbols and used the guitar or the mandolin, letters, combining sort of music themes within their paintings. Slide, please. And combining some of Seurat's technique of the pointillist, the dots, the patches. Slide, please. But these were intellectual studies of breaking up a flat surface. They were no longer interested in representing an object within the spatial concept of the Renaissance artist. We have come the full gamut now from the introduction of humanism and of spatial relationships and atmosphere introduced by Giotto, again back to the flat, two-dimensional decorated surface of the modernist. Slide, please. Another innovation that Picasso introduced to the world of art was collage, and this came in the late teens or the early 20s. They would take actual objects, newspapers, labels, wallpaper, cutting them out and gluing them on a surface, and then sort of working a drawing or a design around them or on top of them. This is called collage, C-O-L-L-A-G-E, a French term meaning glued on. Slide, please. And most of the times they were worked within the still life area, bottles, tables, objects that would be placed upon a table. Sometimes they would create a very textured effect. Slide, please. And this one, which is very close to Brock's work, the friend of Picasso's, where he started his career as a finisher in a furniture factory, and at that time it was very voguish to paint wood grain on the wood. They used this in their paintings, imitating wood grain. Also at this time they were introducing sand and gravel within the pigment to create heavy textured areas. Slide, please. And in this one where you have a piece of wallpaper pasted on the background and actually a flattened out portion of a matchbox, and then with subtle pencil drawings he sort of completes in perspective or incorrect perspective the feeling of the depth of the matchbox, and then an indication of the table line and the molding along the edge of the table. Slide, please. A piece of the newspaper pasted down, creating a still life with some sort of a mug, an indication of a molding, and the drawing of a bottle. But all of these are not representational of the object to get into the early 1920s. Texture comes back, but it's still much more a vertical and horizontal feeling of things pasted up against a flat surface. Slide, please. Although this one was completed in 1907, it was a forerunner to a much later style that Picasso uses again and again, and most people would consider this of the grotesque period of Picasso's work. He was working on this very abstract painting. It's fairly large, about 7 feet square, of 5 nudes. A friend returned from Africa with some primitive Negro sculptures, and Picasso was very much influenced and liked the way that the primitive Africans had stylized the human face, the repetition of patterns. And he painted out 3 of the faces and repainted them with sort of replicas of the African mask. With this, you have the first distortion of the human face where the features are placed out of kilter to where they should be. Slide, please. And he continued with this distortion of the human figure, thinking of the flat pattern, that the painting becomes the important thing, that the relationship of the figure to the real thing is no longer important, but the painting itself, with the surface broken up into patterns and areas, giving off some sort of a spirit or a light, such as this, the dancers. Slide, please. And this very important one of the early 20s, the musicians, owned by the Museum of Modern Art, where it is completely broken up into flat patterns. He has the sort of clowns playing different musical instruments. The subject is obvious. Of course, it's no longer the photographic thing, but flat pattern, a decorated surface. Slide, please. And again, the clown, harlequin, diamonds breaking up the pattern, some music to the indication of the violin, using the punctures on the violin as a part of its design. And the face becomes just sort of flat sheets of squares or geometric shapes, just with an indication that it is a head or where an eye or a nose possibly might be. Slide, please. In the early 1920s, he returns then to what is called his classic style. And again, he goes back to the sensitive drawings of the early rose and blue periods. But this time, the figures take on a little more massive shape. As in the classic tradition, there is a great solidity to the figures, to their architecture, but a great purity and simplicity within the structure. This Picasso also used in his classic period. The faces become highly stylized, and as in the early Greek sayings, the forehead and the nose become a single plane with the line flowing from hairline to end of nose. Slide, please. But all of his things have, again, this overlay of drawing on top of fairly thin washed color. Slide, please. And a detail. This becomes purely classic Picasso face. Just as in many of the artists have developed individual styles in their simplification of the eye treatment, this is very reminiscent of Picasso. And as I said, he draws beautifully. He has whole books of drawings that look so simple that anybody could do it. And yet, they're his own unique style. They're completely individual and beautifully done. Slide, please. Along with the classic period, he goes into these monumental, heavy figures, massive shapes, crowding the canvas area, many times placed on the beach in sort of an open vastness. He even has used, if the models are clothed, they're usually in some sort of a copy of a Greek tunic. Slide, please. He does the mother and child routine over and over again, and always, as with most of the other artists, sort of a warmth that he includes in no other painting. Even though in some of his children's works they're sort of grotesque, cumbersome, awkward, they still have sort of a kindness to him that he gives to no other figure within his work. Slide, please. The nude on the beach, again, the massive shape, this building from his classic period. Slide, please. Even within still life, in a slightly different technique, of where through the wet paint he scratches a line back to the white canvas. Throughout Picasso's art, this linear quality of the draftsmanship is very important in most of his paintings. And in this especially so, where it's actually a drawing in wet paint rather than painting. Slide, please. Then in the late 20s, he starts distorting the objects again. And then in the early 1930s, they will go into a more grotesque, cruel, mean, sadistic period of art. But the objects are still easily recognizable. We know exactly what they are. And yet he has made them into something they could never be. The picture becomes forms of shapes and triangles and curves. The candlestick holder and the candle flame, the pot on the right, all of these are very imaginative and inventive forms that belong purely to Picasso. Slide, please. There is usually great whimsy in Picasso's work. A lot of times you feel like he's pulling your leg. Sometimes he actually means to. He's very childlike. In the biographies, the practical jokes that he and Brock used to play on each other belong to sort of the early teenage category. Slide, please. And the dead chicken on the table, which is a favorite subject of practically every French artist, and yet each one portrays it in their own individual style. This one, the chicken with the bound feet and the cut neck hanging over the edge of the table, are distinctly Picasso forms and shapes. Slide, please. In one area of his work, it sort of looks like a patchwork quilt, of flat patterned, flat colored areas that work together with some degree degree of success. It becomes a little busy this way. Always in Picasso's work, even as abstract as they get sometimes, the subject is still recognizable, and they almost assume the space that, if they were done realistically, would be pure Renaissance technique. Slide, please. As in this one, the patches of color get so confused that you sort of lose sight of the balcony railing. Slide, please. In this one, Girl Before a Mirror, also owned by the Museum of Modern Art in New York, breaks up the space to a great success. The girl on the left with the standing in front of the oval standing mirror on the right, with every little area broken up into brilliant color in some sort of a pattern or design. You still have, in the overlay of the faces, the simplification of the classic drawing, and especially in the features on the girl on the left, you have both the double view of the profile and the full face. Slide, please. Some of these things are just pure abstractions of the still life objects, where they just are scattered across the surface of the canvas in a decorative manner. Slide, please. In the early 1930s, his style began to change. There was a vicious quality about it, a brutality. The objects became more distorted, more pulled. And it was at this time that, as we look back now, that the artists, in their more emotional state, were sensing the rumblings of the coming of the Second World War. Many of the artists, in looking back at their styles now, we see this connotation. And Picasso, with the even though he's in the French school, with his strong attachment to the Spanish heritage, felt brutally the effects of the Spanish Revolution in the mid-1930s. He did this large painting called Guernica, which was a tribute to the assassination of a Spanish town in the Revolution. And it is a huge thing. It's also owned by the Museum of Modern Art in New York City. It's about 20 feet long, done in all the gray shades, with all the brutalness and the horror of the actual scene itself. Slide, please. In the 1940s, he changed back to still life, using conventional props, the skull, but still distorting them or changing them to sort of make them more interesting to the eye. Slide, please. And in the 40s and early 1950s, the style becomes more fanciful again. He did a whole series in mid-1950s of studies of the Velázquez painting of the Maids of Honor. He lived in Antibes at the time, and from his balcony windows did a whole series of the Riviera. Slide, please. But his imagination never ceases. He has gone from painting to graphics to ceramics to sculpture, although we're looking mostly at the paintings today. Slide, please. This one, going back to the mid-1930s, of the wild animal, the tiger destroying the bird. Again, we see still the heavy influences of the primitive sculpture, especially in the repetition of the line quality on the animal's face. Slide, please. And the distortion of forms becoming more brutal, paint piled up, sort of more vicious attack on the surface of the canvas. Slide, please. And this one done in 1939, just after the invasion of Poland. The Crying Woman. Slide, please. This was a portrait of one of his mistresses, and even though it is distorted as it is, it still catches some of the characteristics of how the woman actually looked. She had fairly large eyes, and of course the hair was a conventional method of showing it. Slide, please. Woman on a couch. Slide, please. And a bullfight. Everything becomes flat pattern. There is no light source. There is no atmosphere. Things are piled on top of each other. The canvas itself, the flatness of the canvas, becomes the important object. Slide, please. Family group. Very late in life, he had 2 children that are now in their early 20s. Slide, please. And this is an interior of his scene on the Riviera. Palm trees forming a nice repetition pattern through the window. You see the balcony railing. Objects within the studio, the easel to the left, the sculpture stand to the right. Slide, please.